much of the country's history, much of Guyana's history is hidden away in foreign archives. Welcome to another adventure in Guyanese literature and history. And let's also wes- welcome Professor Kars, the author of Blood on the River, a chronicle of mutiny and freedom on the wild coast. Professor Kars, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
And welcome again to Guyana because we'll talk about your first visit.
All
Sometime.
right.
Before we go into the book, why why is history or why is the study, I don't know if it's two questions, why is history or the study of history important?
Oh, that's a huge question.
Yeah, it might be
I
complex, but
guess,
give us a simple and then we can go into complex later.
well, I think the study of history is incredibly important because when people don't know where they come from, I think they have a harder time imagining where they might want to go. And so if people don't know their history, I think that it's harder for them to be full citizens. And also when people don't know their history, it's easy to tell them things about the past that aren't true.
Yeah, yeah. But more and more of our history is being uncovered. So, as you said in your book, you know, the about the winners writing our history would not fly. Now you've sort of undertaken to give us a simple answer to the question of why history or why the study of history is important. How um, history, how it matters to you?
How it matters to me personally.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, I've dedicated my life to being an historian. I've been an historian now for, I don't know, 35 years or so. And on a very personal level, I really enjoy bringing stories to light that are not very well known. And so the Berbice Slave Rebellion is one of those. And in part, I think that that is absolutely crucial, not only because it helps people in Guyana hopefully understand their history better, or learn more about their history, but I'm also hoping that in Europe, particularly in the Netherlands, it will make people realize that the Netherlands has a long colonial history in Guyana, and that Guyana ought to be part of any program that the Dutch are thinking about in terms of reparations, increasing awareness, and so on. So I think that studying the past not only has importance because the past itself is interesting and can teach us a lot of things, but also because it can help us make changes for the better in the present.
Take us to your first visit to Guyana. Um, Take us through that research mm, experience.
Well, my first visit was, I think it was 2005, 2004. And I had never been to Guyana before. And I remember that I went to Dubulai Ranch as the place that I sort of made my headquarters besides Georgetown, and just being impressed by how beautiful the river was, how kind all the people were that I met there, but also how, in many ways, the history of Dutch colonialism was still so tangible there. When it rains really hard, little shards of pottery come out of the earth And you can find little pieces of pipe and little pieces of pottery,
Mm-hmm.
some of it made, I think, by African descended people, some of it made by native people, some of it clearly being made in China.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was really amazing to me, how much of that history is still around us, even though the jungle and the rainforest have taken back so much over the years. So there are no buildings anymore, but there are still the big cotton trees. There is still the stuff in the ground, and there's still the landscape
Right.
that both enslaved people and Europeans had to reckon with.
Mm-hmm. How come it was you're the first historian to have visited the area? Uh, Taking into account that I know about the 1763 rebellion quite a long time, long before I think the coffee statue was erected. So I knew about 1763 quite a long time. How come you're the first historian that has visited? And I've also read accounts by our local historians about the same event, um, James Rose and others. So how come you were the first historian to have visited the site?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that I was the first person from abroad to visit. There was a woman named Ineke Velzing. She had done some work on the slave rebellion. And of course, there were many Guyanese and Caribbean historians who had looked at the rebellion. But I think in North America and in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
uh, people really weren't familiar with that rebellion very much. Some historians had heard of it, of course, but in the Netherlands, besides a few historians, regular folks really haven't heard about it at all. And even though I had studied the African diaspora in graduate school, I wasn't familiar with that rebellion. And so when I came across the records in the Dutch archives in The Hague, I remember being very surprised and thinking, whoa, there are all these records here. There were so many records about this rebellion, and I could find, and I didn't know about it. I didn't even know the Dutch had a colony called Berbice, and I was born in the Netherlands. I
Mm.
went to school there, and so that's when I thought I need to write about this rebellion, not only because it's crucial in the history of African descended people, but because people in the Netherlands need to know about it.
Mm-mm. But it's such, the revolution was such that scale, such magnitude, length of time, over a year. How come, we've missed it, how we overlooked it all this time?
Well, I think that probably it made white people uncomfortable over the years, whether it's in the Netherlands or news about this uprising was, people in North America weren't eager for their enslaved people to hear about a massive rebellion that almost became a successful revolution. So I think as long as slavery existed as an institution, white people had reason to try to suppress that knowledge. Although in the record we can see that enslaved people in Berbice talked about it. Even 50, 60 years later, they would
Mm-hmm.
mention the events of
Mm-hmm.
1763.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it lived on among the population here. But I think that abroad, people, slaveholders,
Mm-hmm.
and were sort of keen not to talk about it too much out of fear that it would give enslaved people ideas.
Yeah, yeah. Even one of our foremost writers, Edgar Mittelholzer, talked about the 1763. You mentioned something about the white people not wanting us to know our history, and it brings to mind Thomas Harding. Thomas Harding's book, White Death, which was focused on the 1823 Demerara Slave Uprising. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But I want to move off here now. a bit, we seem to have an idea of what the the rebellion was like, the framework, the outline. But the details that you brought to fore and the way that you crafted the detail, I mean, uh, one of the prize that you won describe your work as dramatic slave revolution. And in chapter 13, I think, there's a lovely verse line. Uh, this is a lovely heading here, but it's not the heading I'm talking about. Outsourcing the war. And this is the line I'm quoting. The scene of shifting alliances on the Berbice is almost cinematic. Dramatic, cinematic. And from the word go, and I'm quoting again, jolting along at 60 miles an hour in the 4x4, I glanced over at Alex, hoping he won't take the truck into one of the deep gullies pitting the road. Reads like a novel. How were you able to do this? I mean, to fashion.
Well, thank you.
yeah, really, right? That's why I use the word cinematic, used by you, and dramatic. How were you able to fashion all this detail, and it's amazing details you've gone into here? How were you able to fashion, to read like a novel, to that I can imagine as a movie?
Well, I keep hoping it will be a movie one day, but I think I was really eager to try to write a narrative that would engage people because I wanted this story better known. So I figured if I wrote a very academic sounding book, nobody would want to read it. So I worked hard on making it a story where, not, I mean, to call it a page turner, that would be immodest, but to try and make it so that people would want to keep reading. But I also had amazing material to work with.
Ah,
You know, the fact that I could draw on almost 900 interrogations of self-emancipated people as they were being brought back into slavery and they were being questioned by the Dutch. They many of them told amazing stories. And then I had reports from Dutch officials and from soldiers and from just all kinds of letters that people wrote home. So the material I had was incredibly rich, and that allowed me to create a narrative that had a lot of detail that that gave me and hopefully the reader a feeling for what it was like to be in an uprising. Because we tend to think, you know, why didn't enslaved people rise up all the time? Well, I think that the book shows that rising up was a profoundly scary thing to do, that it led to hunger, that it led to illness, that people were horribly punished when the uprising didn't succeed and they were taken back into slavery by the Dutch, and that it was a profoundly frightening thing. And I think the material I had allowed me to sketch in detail what the weather was like, what the environment was like, what the challenges were like that people had to contend with every day.
now as you move along on the ground in Guyana, and your notes in your head or your hand or your computer, what was it like